How do you see the current generative AI trends shaping the future of enterprise operations and developer roles over the next 5 years?
Two ways. One is outside in, and the other is inside out.
Data accuracy, privacy, and security being critical concerns for both enterprises and developers. How does Epam System address these challenges?
As an organization, they want to talk to their data. It's an intelligent interface, so you can actually talk to the data in natural language.
Welcome to a new episode of Tech Talks. I'm Vandana Nair, Senior Technology Journalist at AIM. And today I have with me Elaina Shekhter, Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer at Epam Systems. Hello Elaina, how are you doing today? And welcome to Tech Talks.
Thank you. I'm doing great. It's been a whirlwind week.
All right, amazing. All right, so let's just dive right in to the obvious generative AI. So Elaina, can you tell me, how do you see the current generative AI trends shaping the future of enterprise operations and developer roles over the next 5 years?
Great question. I think everyone's got that on their minds. I think in two ways, and actually I gave a bit of a talk on this earlier during the conference. Two ways. One is outside in, and the other is inside out. So if you think about outside in, it has to do with adoption by particularly large enterprises because they tend to sort of shape the trends in the industry, and the impact of generative AI on pretty much everything that they do, from skills and talent strategy to organizational design to processes and the way the businesses are constructed to infrastructure operations to governance and various kind of, it's really a set of pillars that define a modern enterprise. And generative AI is impacting every single dimension of the enterprise. And interestingly enough, enterprises are quick to adopt GenAI experimentation and move that to really more pilot stages right now. So that's the outside in. And they're doing it really with two goals in mind. One is optimization of their own business operations, so cost, efficiency, time to market. And the other one is really looking for opportunities to create new revenue streams. So these are new products, new services, new capabilities. The inside-out view is really what happens from the standpoint of talent. And since we're talking about data engineers here, and engineers more broadly, generative AI has been taken up, I think, with some degree of fervor a few years ago by the majority of sort of the advanced engineering crowd. And people have now had a few years to experiment in terms of their daily tasks. So this is test case development, testing execution, data engineering, data cuts, coding, etc. And I think the trend there is really only accelerating. I think the individual developers are realizing that generative AI is a tool and it's an accelerant for them to be able to do their work. I think what is now coming to the forefront is, okay, well, what does this mean for how we collaborate in teams? What does this mean for how we work in general across the board in more complex sort of organizational setups? And I think there's a healthy sort of amount of questions and considerations that people have on both ends of the spectrum from a career path perspective. So from the junior engineer all the way up to the very senior architects, because they see the adoption of generative AI really reshaping the way their jobs are constructed. And so there's a lot of questions about what does the future look like and what do I do now?
So do you see that in the next 5 years there would be a rapid explosion or in terms of adoption or the kind of change that will happen with generative AI?
Yeah, I think so. Again, it's a context, and I think the context is really important because there's be no reason for developers to adopt, a fast curve on Gen AI if enterprises and businesses and governments weren't interested in actually running with it as well. And so yes, I think 5 years is a very long time horizon when it comes to AI evolution. I mean, if you look at technological change overall, it's accelerating. And generative AI, the way that it's going for us, or seemingly, is that the change isn't linear. The adoption and the impacts are exponential in nature. So I'm looking at the next 2 years, the next 3 years, to really start to see the shape of the trends coming up.
So Elaina, as the Chief Marketing and Strategy Officer, how do you align Epam Systems' marketing strategies with the emerging trends in AI and developer productivity to stay ahead in the industry?
Well, we're an engineering company. We're a global company, over 52,000 people, the vast majority of whom are engineers. So for us, the most natural kind of voice of authority is around engineering transformation. And we've been lucky to have had early access a few years ago with some of the code gen tools that have now become mainstream. And so we're not just talking for the sake of marketing. We're talking in terms of real findings, in terms of real impacts, both productivity, how we do our daily work, and also developer expectations. There's actually quite a bit of research that we've been doing and actually publishing around the impacts at the level of the developer and the level of the team. From a marketing perspective, for us, the departure is natural from engineering to business transformation to business change to evolution of the markets. And so there's a lot of content that we're producing and actually campaigns that we're driving to look at really the transformation from the same dimensions that I mentioned, outside in, what does this mean for business change and our client base, and then inside out, what are we doing in terms of anticipating and really enabling the next generation developer experience. There are conferences, campaigns, as I said, a lot of digital content. And I think really the biggest sort of impact we can make is actually tell the stories with our clients.
What are some of the most innovative uses of generative AI you have observed in the industry recently? And how are these innovations impacting developer experiences?
Well, I'm a little selfish. So one of the biggest sort of opportunities, I'd say it's kind of a discovery, is the idea that there is a preponderance of large language models. Obviously, there are public large language models, which are sort of provided by the CSPs and sold, let's be frank, sold by the cloud service providers. There are a number of really great open source models. There are a number of proprietary models, and they're constantly sort of being created in new and very unique combinations. There's also really the requirement to be able to combine generative AI with other forms of AI. So you want to have, the ability to retrieve data and actually do calculations and algorithms that are more deterministic in nature, which means you have to have access to applications data, which is where the data foundation is really important. So for us, the big discovery is that what we really needed wasn't just kind of point access to one LLM or another, one application or another. We needed an orchestration workbench that allowed us to have access to a multitude of data sources, including plugins to a variety of LLMs, and then to be able to kind of pick and choose the use cases. And the use cases are incredibly varied. I think I actually can give you one public one. So we did some work, we continue to do work with IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And one of the things that they wanted to do, as simple as it sounds, is as an organization, they want to talk to their data. And clearly you can imagine it's an economic organization. They're capturing and storing and processing just an absolute abundance of data. And so this application called Dial that we created and launched and then subsequently actually open sourced is used as really an orchestration workbench, giving access to the economists and the analysts, sort of a single view, single interface, effectively a front door for pretty much any kind of data set. And it's an intelligent interface, so you can actually talk to the data in natural language. And it sounds a bit simple because you think, well, wow, I can do that right now with search engines, but the fact is you really can't. The complexity of the construction of the prompts and the information you want to retrieve and the decisions you want to make, they're just not available as a straight search engine interface.
In your opinion, how do productivity and experience intersect for developers working with large enterprises? And can you share examples from Epam Systems itself?
Okay, so I think we've gone away from the experience of being a developer being about foosball tables and beanbag chairs and gaming lounges. I think nowadays what developers are looking for is really the redefinition of how they work. So both individually on tasks, as well as how they collaborate in teams. And the context here is obviously data engineers, but this applies broadly to all sort of tasks related to the software development lifecycle. So including coding, including testing, including requirements, including kind of if you're working in an agile, the full kind of Scrum team. And I think the intersection and the implications of generative AI are redrawing the entire software development lifecycle so that the tasks that used to take the vast majority of time, so code construction, for example, no longer take the majority of time, and sort of restructuring the daily workflow of a developer or a tester. What we're finding from our data is that it isn't necessarily driving a tremendous individual productivity gain because people just repurpose their time toward other things. But what we are finding is that it's restructuring the ways of working for the development lifecycle, and we're seeing significant productivity gains. And what that means from an experience perspective is that you can spend more time doing the things you love, which is figuring out solutions to difficult problems, experimenting with different kind of code constructions, actually spending less time in provisioning environments and deploying code, and more time in sort of thinking creatively about the problem set. From an enterprise perspective, I think the transformation around the development lifecycle hasn't really happened yet. This is something that we're actually trying to really promote and position. As soon as it does, I think the implication for the enterprise is going to be organization-wide, because it isn't implications that are only felt in the engineering department. It's felt broadly in the business. I mean, I gave you the example of talk to your data as a use case. Imagine if that's something that you can offer to every role in the enterprise. So I think the challenge is, can we get there from here in our minds? And the opportunity is we don't have to wait that long because the changes are happening so quickly. Organizations are making efforts, I think, to adapt. They might have to speed up their adaptiveness programs up and down the entire sort of enterprise stack. But I think the experience is going to be a recursive change, right? So the individual experience is transformed, which drives the transformation of the team experience, which drives the transformation of the organizational experience, and it's a recursive change. So it's a really exciting time, I think, right now to be an engineer, to be someone who's in the tech sector.
So you touched upon, so right now we're not there yet, but we are going to be at an enterprise level. So how soon do you anticipate that to happen?
Yesterday, we had over a dozen very senior tech leaders here at a roundtable really talking about sort of where are we with adoption, how are you guys thinking about some of the fundamentals. And what I found surprising is that companies, particularly large ones, are further than we thought they were. They are not just playing. They are in it to win it. I think we're within a year of serious production deployments of solutions that were built in this new way. And I mean end-to-end build with GenAI as part of the core of the way of working. And I think those stories are going to accelerate the transformation for the rest. So my guess is within 2 years, every serious company is going to have a public use case.
Let's talk about data accuracy, privacy, and security being critical concerns for both enterprises and developers. How does Epam System address these challenges, and what advice would you give to other companies navigating these issues?
Good question. I mean, the data challenge is a real challenge for everyone. And we are particularly exercised because we're not only dealing with our own data, but we're dealing with client data. And so the protection there has got to be really rigorous. And so we obviously have, procedures in place, there's access rules, there's all sorts of the usual things that you would do to really be compliant from a cybersecurity perspective and from a PII and data privacy perspective. I think when you introduce AI, one of the more difficult things that we had to do was not about technology, it was about policy. It was about creating an AI access and use policy that is globally now a requirement for all of our teams, regardless of whether they're engineers or testers. Anyone who's working with client information is required to actually go through a training to understand our policy on the responsible use of GenAI. And there are a number of components in there, including sort of obfuscating data, limiting the use of synthetic data. It's really kind of a number of principles, and there's a framework for it that's emerging in responsible AI, which is called FAIR, and I won't go into the details, but I mean, there's a structure around the responsible access and use of data in the context of GenAI. The one thing that we are doing, and again, why we went out both internally and externally with this orchestration workbench, is that probably the most critical element of for us is traceability, right? So if you're generating code you need to be able to understand where it's coming from and what data access it has and the rules it's sort of compliant to. And then secondly, many of our clients actually have intellectual property concerns and constraints on the ability to actually utilize code that's been generated through these tools. And so we're extremely careful in terms of how we access the various LLMs, both public and open source, and then how we access proprietary data for the enterprises. It's a very, very complex area, and it isn't enough just to write a policy, although I have to say that was one of the more difficult things we had to do.
So would you say winning the confidence of these enterprises or clients is a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think enterprises, like people, fall along a continuum of adoption, right? There's a curve, and it's a bell curve, the usual distribution. So I think there are a number of companies, and it really seems to be sector specific, in other words, vertical. There are a number of companies that were really hungry to jump in. And so if you're like in a retail or in a CPG company, you're looking to optimize, your consumer experience and drive kind of better personalization, drive transactions, et cetera. You can create, to some extent, a walled garden for your experimentation. And so a lot of those guys were really quick to jump on. If you're in a highly regulated industry, let's say healthcare, then you have to be a little bit more careful, and they tend to be a little bit more tenuous. And so it's really kind of this curve of adoption where, it's not only kind of access to, and are we doing something with GenAI? It's what are we doing? What are our use cases? How pervasive are they? And what are the major the major implications that we expect to come as a result of these programs? And this is why I say most of these programs are in pilot stages. We have yet to see very large scale deployments into production, and it's probably right that that's the case, because you're not going to put something into production at a large scale without having considered all of the implications: regulatory compliance, data privacy, security, access, traceability, and not the least of which is cost. I mean, production GenAI programs are, at least for now, relatively costly. So AI ops, or AI FinOps, is something that really is what I would say is kind of an emerging practice, and something that we as consultants need to actually advance for our clients.
From a leadership perspective, what strategies do you employ to foster a culture of innovation among developers at Epam Systems?
We're in a really fortunate position, because the culture of Epam has always been around sort of modern engineering, and for 30 years we've been sort of looking for people that exhibit this engineering DNA, which is what we're calling it. And so the way we find people, the way we kind of train them, the way we onboard them, the way we organize all along has been a culture of innovation. So from that standpoint, the role of leadership isn't to motivate people to be innovative or experimental or advanced or modern. Our role is to provide and enable sort of the opportunities for that. And yes, there's a tremendous amount of training. By the end of this year, hopefully the majority of the company, if not the entire company, will have been upskilled with at least one round of AI and hopefully multiple rounds of AI tooling. That's a big thing. I mean, we're not just doing YouTube training. That's hands-on training through labs, et cetera. But I think the biggest sort of principle we have is that the best innovation comes from working on projects with people. And in our case, we're very fortunate. We have, over 1,000 clients that happen to be really exciting companies pushing the boundaries of technology and innovation. So the opportunity for our developers to work with our clients on these difficult problems is probably sort of the biggest enabler we can provide. From a leadership perspective, I think our sort of general culture is to enable and try to get out of the way, and then help people sort of solve some of the obstacles to move things a little faster and make the friction a little bit less. It's not easy to do that as you scale, and so it takes up a tremendous amount of time.
And if you say you have to, say, compare yourself with your competitors who are also kind of trying to bring in AI and everything, so what would you say your edge is at Epam Systems?
We hung it on billboards all over India. We are a modern engineering home. I mean, I think it's very easy to say we're advanced, we're really innovative. I mean, everyone says that. I think for us, everyone in the company, and really all the way up to our CEO, and I'm the head of marketing, you could hear I'm fairly technical. Everyone is passionate about technology and its advancement and adoption, and it comes across in pretty much everything that we do. And I mean, it's hard to say that that's a competitive edge, but it is a difference. And I think our clients feel it. They feel it in our sort of level of experimentation and creativity. They feel it in our level of excitement around solving problems. I mean, and really kind of that's what it comes down to for us.
All right. So that was great, Elaina. Thank you so much for giving us the time. This was truly an insightful and wonderful session. So thank you so much, Elaina.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.